you for joining our weekly show each week. Uh, Particularly our audience down in South Florida. Thanks for sending me the text. I didn't respond, but I recognize you, and also our people in New York City. Uh, don't forget to call in today. Give us an update on the mayor's race, like you've been doing on a regular basis. Today we have our superstar panels, Attorney Primes and Attorney Banks, and they're going to help us along. Also, we have a special guest. The former NFL Players Association Executive Director, to enlighten us on what happens, for example, the NFL that you don't really know about that's very significant. We lost it. Okay. But in any event, before we get started on that issue, there was something very important in terms of the legal dynamics of our country. I mean, today we're going to have these mass protests, but one of the things, Marlon and Attorney Banks, that's critical is the issue about this voting, this case going to the Supreme Court. And tell us about that real quickly, that Voting Rights Act, and why it's significant.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and certainly a pleasure to be here. Yes, the Voting Rights Act is one of the key, pillars of the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s. You had the Voting Rights Act of 64, the Civil Rights Act of, Voting Rights Act of 65, the Civil Rights Act of 64, and the Housing Discrimination Act of 68. And so, the clear and present danger here is that the Voting Rights Act, it was designed to remedy disenfranchisement of many African Americans in the former Confederacy. So you had literacy tests, you had, tests of grandfather clauses, and literally you had some counties in the United States where no African Americans were registered to vote. So what the Voting Rights Act basically was designed to do was it said that, hey, these states that and counties that are most egregious have to have pre-clearance before they change the voting rules because of the discriminatory history. Well, that got overruled in Shelby County case, and then the only thing that was left was Section 2, which is the enforcement provision. And so the Supreme Court, had this decision, this case that was on their docket last year. They didn't reach a decision and then reached out to this issue about the constitutionality of Section 2. So the issue that really hasn't been reported widely, it's really important for your audience, is that the state of Louisiana is about 33% African American. They have 6 congressional districts, but what happened is that only one of those districts was allocated, was a opportunity district, an election opportunity district for African Americans. So there was a series of factors that must be examined, and there was a determination that this was a violation of the Voting Rights Act. So they basically, as a remedy, said, hey, we're going to have a second election opportunity district for African Americans. And the court now is attempting to suggest that this remedy, in response to this underrepresentation of African Americans and overrepresentation, of those that don't look like us, they're trying to suggest that perhaps this remedy is unconstitutional. So what a lot of pundits are saying around the country is that you have this existing framework with 33% of the population in Louisiana, African American. They get 18% of the vote, or 18% of the opportunities to elect someone with one representative, whereas Black voters are only 56% of the population, but they get 83% of election opportunity districts. So it's overrepresentation. So, many pundits say that, hey, if Section 2 is deemed constitutional, you may see 30 of the 62 seats held by members of the Congressional Black Caucus basically eradicated, and then you may very well have minority rule, which is really problematic. So I think that we really, need to make sure that your listeners and those within our, sphere of influence are really aware of this, because there's been a lot of misreporting. There's not just, we're handing out, districts for the sake of saying that, hey, we want to elect African Americans. There's a detailed process, and there was a determination that there was a violation of the Voting Rights Act, and the remedy was to add an additional district. So there's been a lot of misreporting about that. And, if the Supreme Court follows through, it really can have a lasting impact on, our ability to have, wide representation in Congress. So it's very, very troubling.
We'll get back to this important subject, but we have a special guest. He's back on the air now. D. Maurice Smith, former executive director of the NFL Players Association. We had a fascinating book signing. I learned so much information last night about the NFL, the billionaire owners, and things like that. It's just a fascinating thing. Mr. Smith, Attorney Smith, how are you doing today, sir?
Well, brother, I'm doing well, and thank you for putting together the book event last night. We had a great time, a great conversation, and Marlon, it is great to hear your voice again.
Yeah.
Hey, great to hear you. Great to see you as well.
Okay, straight to the point. The most intriguing part about this is, a lot of us are football fanatics, you know that, and you explain why. But this deal that you put together that ended that lockout, tell us about that real quickly. It was just a fascinating thing I learned last night.
Yeah, Nathaniel, one of the things we always bring as lawyers to any paradigm that we're working in is we're trained to really engage in advanced game strategy. And in 2011, the first collective bargaining agreement I did, we were faced with really a daunting challenge. The owners had accumulated $4 billion in lockout money, and we found out later on that they achieved that lockout fund almost in its entirety by a negotiated deal with the four major networks that carried football at the time, where the networks had agreed to give them $1 billion each in the event that there was no football for a year in 2011. And for lawyers coming into a place like that, you have one of two choices, and thankfully most lawyers pick B. Let's go to war. So we sued the National Football League on a theory that because the players were third-party beneficiaries of those television contracts, when the league negotiated that $1 billion from each network, that had to come at some cost. The networks, extracted something for that, and we successfully convinced a federal judge in Minnesota that violated the collective bargaining agreement. The judge froze their $4 billion of their war chests, and at the same time, we developed what is still now the only lockout insurance policy. I started off in London. We went to 3 other countries that I would love to tell you, but none of you are in the NBA. But we went to 3 separate countries, and we secured an insurance policy that if the players had missed the entire season, the players would be paid something close to about $950 million. So, yeah, everybody talks about the importance of a negotiation strategy. I think what most people miss is when it comes to the NFL owners, or when it comes to a legal monopoly, they are not interested in a fair negotiation. They're only interested in a leveraged negotiation. And so, while we had a certain negotiation strategy, once we got into the room for a fair negotiation, we had to fight like cats and dogs just to make that negotiating table somewhat balanced before we even got into the room.
All right, Marlon or Benita, you have a quick question? Okay, here's a second issue. Marlon is in Cleveland.
Yep.
And I suspect that he may be a Browns fan.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, hey, you feel our pain here.
But this conundrum to deal with their quarterback, and we just saw Flacco look like a Hall of Famer this week against Cincinnati, the starting quarterback for Cleveland. We got a superstar in college who was the most accurate passer in the history of major college football, Sanders, on the sideline. Why is it that it seems like, in my mind at least, there's this mass conspiracy against this young man?
Yeah, look, there are so many things that go into, American football, really any sports, but probably the NFL in particular, because, and I think it's for three primary reasons. I really think the reporting from most sports reporters on the NFL is atrocious. Just to be dead honest, it's mostly atrocious. And we're at a point now in the National Football League where there are so many sports reporters who, the way it's set up, you don't really even have to go to the game to cover an NFL team anymore. The league sends you producers' reports, producers' notes, reporters' notes. So I think that's the first problem because there are very, very few reporters who really want to dive into the dysfunction that might be at their home NFL team. And they don't want to do that because they don't want to lose their access. So that's kind of number one. Number two, if you spend time with players in the National Football League, it's one thing that I will never forget. People talk less about the individual skill of an individual player, especially at quarterback. They talk more about the scheme or the system that that quarterback finds themselves in. And I think when it comes to Cleveland, or we could probably sit here in between the three, four of us, and certainly anybody who's listening out there, we could probably come up with 10 examples where, especially a rookie quarterback, comes into a system, either has a tough time or flounders, or a free agent comes into a system, either has a tough time or he flounders. And then something happens, they go to another team and they look like a superstar. Well, the skill level of the individual player hasn't changed. The only thing that's changed is really the quality of the coaching and the scheme that that player found himself in at his former team. And you can literally go down the line over the last 5 or 10 years and see tons of quarterbacks who leave some team before because it just doesn't work, and then they end up at another system or another scheme, and it does. So I think that there was a tremendous amount of how do I put this nicely? I don't know why I would care about putting it nicely. I don't put anything nicely in turf wars, right? I mean, there's nothing that I spare anyone there. I think that there is a lot of coaches, frankly, who do extremely well because of the talent that they have on their team. And I think that there's a lot of coaches who don't do well because they try to impose a scheme on top of the talent that doesn't work. And I think for a young man like Shedeur coming into the National Football League, who came in with a large sense of bravado, but with a tremendous amount of skill, I think that there were a lot of teams and quarterbacks and offensive coordinators and owners who simply didn't want that type of personality on their team. And that is just the reality of NFL football. That so many owners, so many coaches do not want any personality that is bigger or could possibly overshadow the team or overshadow the league. And they want conformity as their top commodity. Yeah, I mean, well, think
Yeah, I
about
think
it.
the other pro
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the other problem is that, the problem that we've had in Cleveland, it's been, talent evaluation. Any good lawyer, they're able to adjust to a different situation. And I think sometimes you have a coach to say, hey, this is my system. I'm
Right.
going with this system irregardless of my talent that I have available. And the best example I give people in sports is Red Auerbach. There was a player on his team they drafted. He couldn't shoot. He couldn't dribble. And come to find out, what he did best was playing defense and blocking shots. You know, the guy was Bill Russell.
Right.
So Red Auerbach immediately found out that, hey, no, this guy's not going to do a jump shot. And he really put him in the system that he worked best. And I think that's kind of part of the problem with some NFL teams are able to adjust and they're able to put you in a situation. And, if you're a team where you're bullheaded and, hey, I'm going to run this offense irrespective, then you have a problem. And it's been a long problem in Cleveland with that. Looking at, even Couch, when we drafted him, this guy was a rollout quarterback and you tried to make him a drop back passer.
Yeah.
But
Look,
you go ahead.
there is so much arrogance, on the inside of the way these teams are operated and the way these teams are run. And primarily the source of that arrogance is that it's indulged. I mean, a team in the National Football League is going to make hundreds of millions of dollars in profit every year, regardless of whether you win or lose. That's just true. So, I mean, in the brains of the fan, and it's reinforced because very few sports writers want to talk about it. Some of these teams are less constructed to win than they are constructed to make a profit. And for the fans out there who think I am kidding, there was a time before 2011 when we did the 2011 deal. And again, I come into the sport of football as, a little bit of a fan, but certainly not a huge football fan, and certainly not as a lawyer who was involved in sport. And I remember in 2009, 2010 coming in and, there's a certain amount again, the way in which sports writers would lecture you on, well, D, you don't understand this, you don't understand that. And as lawyers, hey, look, I'll be the first person to say, this is what I don't understand, this is what I know. No, at the same time, I'm the first person who will say, I think I know it better than you. So I remember 2009, 2010 coming in and everybody just peppering me with these questions about, well, what is the salary cap going to look like, in 2010? What's the salary cap going to look like in 11? What's the salary cap going to look like in 12, 13, 14? And I remember being absolutely bewildered by that question because while everybody is focused on the cap, nobody was focused on the spend. Right? I mean, imagine if you are a young lawyer, you just got out of law school, you sit down and you're interviewing with a number of firms, and let's just say that 3 potential firms are sitting in front of you, and they all say, hey, look, we can afford to pay you $200,000, or we can afford to pay you $250,000, or we can afford to pay you $300,000. Are you happy with that conversation? No. You don't want to hear what they can afford to pay. You want to hear what? What are they going to pay you? So when we started, and I started looking at, forget the salary caps for a while, I'll never forget in 2010 asking the salary cap division in our office, I want you to do a regression analysis over the past 5 years of what percentage of the salary cap do NFL teams spend? And you know what I found out? That there were always 10 teams, at least, that would spend less than 80% of the salary cap every year. Every year. Mm. So fans are going to the game thinking that the owner and the team want to spend the absolute most amount of money they could spend in order to win. And sports reporters are sitting there saying, well, they got to trade this guy because of the cap, and this guy's got to renegotiate his salary because of the cap, and they've got to do X, Y, and Z because of the cap. But when you look at the data and look at the math, you would see teams like Kansas City and Buffalo, who almost on the daily were spending less than 80% of the salary cap. So that tells me one thing. The owner cares more about making money than winning. So, when the problem is we come into these systems and we make all of these assumptions that make sense to us. The only problem is the assumptions have no basis in fact. So when I look or hear a story that a team has to get rid of this guy because of the cap, or they need to renegotiate this guy's salary because of the cap hit, what I know now is after 2011, we changed the salary cap structure so that it is the softest cap in professional sport. You can overspend on the cap if you want. If you haven't spent 100% of the cap the year before, you get to carry that money forward for the next year. You can do all sorts of things to increase the amount of money over and above what it looks like a hard salary cap. But here's what we changed in 2011. You now have to spend. In 2011, we changed it to 89%. In 2020, I think we changed it to 93, 94%. But when we did the same regression analysis in 2015 to see what percentage of the salary cap was being spent after 2011, what did we find? Almost every team is spending 99, 97% of the salary cap. So think about it. You know what made the biggest difference in teams spending all their money? Not brilliant coaches, not GMs, not owners, players. Players made those teams spend money. And what do you see after 2011? You saw the rise of the Kansas City Chiefs, and you saw the rise of the Buffalo Bills. Two teams that was spending less than 80% of the salary cap at some points. So for those people listening in places like, frankly, Cleveland and Buffalo and Kansas City, hey Nathaniel, you can pop up your address. You can start sending the thank you notes now if you want. But literally, when you think about the ecosystem, the economic ecosystem of the National Football League, everyone should stop holding on to the assumptions about the game that make you feel better and embrace the realities of the way in which these billionaires run their teams in reality. Because if you start to focus on they don't always want to win, they want to hoard as much personal money as possible. They want to treat workers as fungible, interchangeable commodities that they can get rid of, that they really don't want overhead costs like healthcare or injury care. And they want to do whatever they can to make your mobility as limited as possible. If you think about those 5 truths in the National Football League, you will now understand the billionaire class that's now running America, because all 5 things are exactly the same. Exactly the same. So I didn't want to write Turf Wars. I didn't want to write a football book. For 15 years, I dealt with 31 billionaires that are exactly like the people who now run our data systems, our information systems. They run our news outlets. They run our healthcare. And when you looked behind the podium of when this president was sworn in, you looked at the 5 or 6 people standing behind him, and now you know who the people are who are running the country. And more importantly, how we how we have to think about how we fight back on that.
Attorney Banks.
I don't have a question. And thank you, Attorney Smith. I just want to say that I agree with your analysis regarding the billionaire class that's running our nation at this time. And it's a 1%, and then it's all of us, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you've just eloquently stated the reality of the nation that we're living in today.
Yeah. No, and thank you for that. It is exactly where we find ourselves. And for the same reasons, I find myself really frustrated with the Democratic leadership, because to me, it has taken them too long to understand this is the structure and this is the way they fight the game. And for us, when I was representing a group of 1,850 NFL players, look, if we decided that we were going to engage in a linear fight against the billionaires, we lose. So the way that I structured the union was that we are going to fight back on as many multiple platforms as we possibly could. And the owners hated the fact that I was and we were um, pointed in the way in which we talked about them publicly. They hated it. They hated the fact that when it came to any infraction where I thought that they violated the collective bargaining agreement, we would use every litigation tool in our arsenal to fight every battle as hard as possible. And for example, I know I'm in Indianapolis, and last night we talked about January 15th of 2015 and the issue of deflated footballs. I get it, but if you look at or read Turf Wars or go back and take a look at the response, my response to the way the league handled that, we litigated that case like I would litigate a Supreme Court case. And the reason we do that is if the billionaire class, they really don't want to fight. They want capitulation. And so when we look at the way that this administration has targeted the Smithsonian, the way that it has targeted universities, the way that it has forced major law firms in this country to knuckle under. The thing that is terrifying is not that they had a will to make those institutions knuckle under. What is terrifying is the speed with which those institutions surrendered. Because those are institutions that are designed to fight. I mean, and again, I tend to be really blunt, but I was a partner at Latham and Watkins for almost 8 years, I guess. Latham was one of those mega firms that agreed to the Trump stipulations. And we're talking about literally thousands of lawyers hired by the best companies in the country who didn't even fight back. So billionaires don't want fights. They don't like fights. So sometimes it is our duty and our job to give them exactly what they don't like. And I guess the last thing that I would say is the other thing billionaires and the billionaire class hates is anything that draws a seamless thread between what is going on or what they're trying to make you do. They hate anything that draws a seamless thread that connects it to civil rights. They hate that. And so, again, we were talked last night about Colin Kaepernick And the league wanted to simply frame this thing around, a player somehow disrupting the game. And that was their narrative. It's just not good for the game, D. The game is about bringing people together. And what Kaepernick is doing and what these players are doing when they're kneeling, we don't really care about what he's doing, D. But at the same time, we just want football to bring people together. And what they hated the most about my response and the NFLPA's response was, first of all, he's not interrupting the game. Nobody's interrupting the game. And you are the people who bring politics into the National Football League. College athletes don't even come out on the field for the national anthem. I wasn't the person who paid the Army or the Air Force or the military for those flyovers. I'm not the one who made the seal of the NFL red, white, and blue. And I wasn't the one in 1933 where you owners made a handshake agreement to ban black players until 1947. So who exactly is bringing politics into what? And so when you frame everything that there is this seamless thread that forever connects us to race and class and gender and history, they hate that. So, the way in which we have to respond to this thing is to not allow them to set a convenient narrative that just sounds lovely. No. I will tell you that for the 15 years, my job, if I was going to go to war with the owners, my job was to make that war as nasty, as bloody, as public, as messy as I could, because one of us can live with that. Because the people who we are, we're used to that. The other side doesn't like that at all.
It's a fascinating book. How do people get that book? I started reading, I couldn't stop.
Yes,
I was thinking to myself, we need to have police protection for this guy because you got to piss off a lot of people, the stuff you wrote in that book, man.
Well, first thing, when you're from DC, and when, Marlon knows this part of it, when you're an assistant U.S. attorney, you are used to sitting with your back against the wall, looking at whoever comes into the door. So that's step number one. But yeah, thank you for always thinking about that. I think about it, as well. But John Lewis, and I think too often our Democratic leadership is fond of quotes, but perhaps not exactly fond of what it means. When John Lewis would talk about good trouble,
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't talking about hashtagging, a pumped fist or hashtagging going to vote. His idea of good trouble was trouble for everyone. And where we have to get back to is literally that militancy, that willingness to sacrifice, that sort of unbridled zero-sum willingness to fight on every level. Because again, what this class wants is capitulation. They just want to slowly boil you until you're gone. And anytime we fall into that, and as you know, one of the reasons I wrote Turf Wars in the way that I wrote it, they abhor the language of emotion. And so I always try to flip every conversation I'm having with somebody on the other side of, it's one thing to for example, and I thought, Marlon, what you were talking about with the Voting Rights Act is so important, because this is a sustained attack, right? And I think that, when we are talking about these issues, we have to talk about it in the way in which you talk about it, because what this argument is in front of the Supreme Court, and it will be pleasant and it will be structured in the way that appellate arguments always are. But the reality of this argument in front of the Supreme Court is someone is trying to take their foot, put it on your neck, and slowly choke you out from your ability to have representation. And that's the way that I talk about the assault on the Voting Rights Act. It probably wouldn't be the way that the justices want to deal with that. But I think part of the problem, and part of the problem we've gotten ourselves into, is when whether it's Justice Thomas or Justice Kavanaugh or some of these other justices who are so indifferent to the history of civil rights and women's rights and immigrants' rights. Just indifferent. They are so comfortable in talking about it in the most antiseptic way. The decisions that they're making are not antiseptic. They are not clean. They are not academic. They will influence the outcomes of people's lives and their livelihoods.
For
And
generations to come.
for generations.
Attorney Smith.
You're right. And I think to a certain extent, and I look again, and I'm obviously, the somewhat frustrated with our Democratic leadership. They seem to forget that the other side is playing a game of winner take all. It's winner take all. It's not, hey, are we going to have this majority in the House, and then we're going to get this majority in the House, and when we get, I heard Speaker Jeffries, if we get back to a point where we have the majority of the House. My problem with that is when you did have the majority of the House, what did you do with it? And now we're at a point where we don't have the majority in the House, we don't have the majority in the Senate, and you seem to not realize that they are playing a game of winner take all. And so when this group stands up and says, I don't care what a district court judge says. I mean, who among us as lawyers could imagine a world where a federal district court judge, and we can make arguments all day, but a federal district court judge might be one of the most, probably the most powerful constitutionally appointed individuals in the country. It's a federal district court judge. When would we ever think that we would just simply say, well, no, you know what? I'm just not gonna obey that. Well, now what? This side is playing winner take all. And when I say winner take all, it is over the rule of law. It is over the rule of precedent. It is over the rule of what our legislators will do. And while everybody wants to talk about equivocation, it is a simple fact that only one party tried to thwart the peaceful transfer of power. Only one.
Hey, one quick question from Emotech. I know you got to leave and catch a flight.
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Hey, Emotech, quickly, what's your question? Go ahead. You got to unmute. Unmute, please. Okay, he's mute.
How do I come off mute?
Oh, there you
Okay,
go.
Okay, it didn't tell me how to come off mute. Okay, all right. Good morning, everyone. And Attorney Smith, I've always looked up, saw you out there battling. I just want to tell you thank you for this. Has been a refreshing discussion. Everybody else is always great, but hearing that new voice, especially from inside, I had cousins that played professional football, good friends played professional football, and their favorite saying was, "They don't give a you know what about us." Two quick things. You were correct about the owners. They don't care. They're getting fat. They did a study from Harvard. There are 19 teams out of the NFL in the last 10 years that have had a losing record. 19 out of 30 teams have a losing record the last 10 years, yet they get fat. Also, you're right about the spending, because they asked Dave Roberts last night from the Dodgers, does it feel like that they're buying championships? And Dave Roberts said, well, we have an ownership group. I don't know the revenue coming in, but the ownership group spends the money on the players. And so therefore I take what the players they get, and we make sure that we get out. Steinbrenner talked about that before he died. Steinbrenner talked about him, the old man did. He spent money on players. Reggie Jackson, I think, was the first $1 million player, if I'm correct. If I think my history is correct. I think Reggie was the first $1 million player. Okay, so Steinbrenner aboard the fact, he said it's going to be a whole lot of them that won't spend, but yeah, I got to help them and give my money to them. Old man hated that. But I got a question for you, Mr. Smith.
Yep.
Mr. Smith. Real fast, the selling of stadiums and the grifting of stadiums to the American taxpayers. How do we get the people to understand that it was a book out called The Field of Schemes? These stadiums are nothing but schemes on the taxpayers and the ownership. You talked about the billionaire class. This is socialism run amok, yet they continue to get away with it. What would be your recommendation to the public and the taxpayers how to view these stadium deals, because they just continue to suck us dry from city to city? Here in Indianapolis, we pay probably one of the highest percentage per capita on the stadiums that was built. So it's really just disconcerting, and the public does not seem to understand. Thanks.
Well, look, and those are great questions, and you're absolutely right about all of it. And I talk a lot about stadium funding in Turf Wars. Look, the reality of this is if taxpayers make a decision that they want the referendum on a new stadium to go directly to the fans versus a deal that is cut directly by either the governor or the city council, you see two interesting changes. When the stadium referendum went directly to the fans in San Diego, the fans said no. No. When you get to Buffalo, Buffalo did not put that referendum directly to the fans. The Buffalo Bills pushed a bill through the governor and the legislature, and it passed. When Kansas City went directly to the fans and said, we want you guys to pay more money in taxes for our house of profit, the fans said no. So what has slowly happened over time is, yes, these stadiums and the way that the billionaire class operates in football is no different from the way the billionaire class operates in the rest of America. They want to privatize their wealth. They want to socialize their cost. Privatize their wealth, socialize their cost. Nobody wants to have a conversation about how much money Google and the biggest corporations in America are paying in income taxes. Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about how much money is being parked offshore in places like Ireland, believe it or not, for these large corporations. And yet, when it comes time for there to be a conversation about tax policy in the United States, it's always a question of what? How much more can we tax people who are working every day? And how much more can we give discounts or benefits to the richest people in the world? My point there is that's avoiding the biggest elephant in the room. It's not how much tax breaks are going to the millionaires. That's important. The real question we should be asking ourselves is these mega international, transnational corporations are not paying their fair share of taxes. And so everybody is comfortable. Again, our Republican leaders and especially our Democratic leaders. When was the last time you heard a Democratic leader, other than Bernie, when was the last time you heard a Democratic leader talking about major corporations not paying their fair share of taxes? They don't. Why don't they? Because they are taking campaign donations from these same people. So if we as taxpayers and we as citizens can't make our own congressmen and legislators and city council members, if we can't make those people 100% accountable to us, we will just continue to lose. So on things like stadium referendums, everybody wants to talk about, man, we can't afford to have the Colts leave. That is a conversation of sophistry. It just simply is. I will tell you right now, in the United States, there is no place for any NFL team to move. It's over. So, Nathaniel, time for a 30-second story?
Yes. Go ahead.
Did you ever wonder why up until whatever it was, 5 or 6 years ago, that in the United States, there were teams all over the place. There's teams stuck in a town as small as Green Bay, Wisconsin, and there's teams in Boston and Miami and DC, and 2 teams in New York, and 1 in Chicago, and 1 in Houston, 1 in Dallas, 1 in Phoenix. And for years, there was no National Football League team in Los Angeles. Do you want to know why? There was no team in Los Angeles because the NFL owners decided to leave Los Angeles open. They make so much money, that they made a decision not to put a team in Los Angeles for one reason. That's so that every other team in the United States, every time they needed a new stadium, would be able to say to the local governor, the local legislator, and the local city council, if we don't get taxpayer money, we are going to move our team to Los Angeles. They kept Los Angeles open for only one reason. That was the stalking horse. That was the arm twisting shakedown of making sure that every jurisdiction ponied up money for taxpayer stadium. So how does it change? First time it changes is how. There's a team in Oakland, and Al Davis doesn't get what? A stadium deal in Oakland. He doesn't have permission to move his team to Los Angeles. So what does Al Davis do? He moves it anyway. And then he sues his own owners for an antitrust violation for restricting his ability to move his team to Los Angeles. And that was the last time that the National Football League owners ever had to turn over their financial statements. And they had to turn them over because a federal judge ordered them to turn over their financial statements in order to analyze Al Davis's, damages claim. So fine, they do that. Eventually they move back to Oakland. And then the NFL got to that point where there was so much saturation that they're done. They needed to move a team out of St. Louis. And the conversation was which team, they had to move a team out of St. Louis, and they wanted to move a team out of, I believe, Jacksonville, because both of those places were underperforming stadiums. Again, if you read the history, and I will say ESPN did a great treatment on that. When Stan Kroenke up and moved his team from St. Louis to Los Angeles, it caused such a fracture between the NFL owners because half of them wanted one team to go to Los Angeles, the other half of them wanted the Rams to make their way to Los Angeles. Jerry Jones throws his support behind Kroenke, and that's why there was a team in Los Angeles. Then what happens? San Diego goes to its fans and says, hey, if the taxpayers don't give us money for a new stadium in San Diego, we're going to move. And you know what the fans said? Move.
See you later.
So that's why, even though the National Football League never wanted a team in Los Angeles, now there's 2 teams in Los Angeles because San Diego didn't have anywhere to go. The league's plan was to have Oakland and the Rams be in Los Angeles. Think about it. It makes sense. The southern team goes north in California, and what? The northern team goes south. And they lock off the fan base in California. When Kroenke does that and the San Diego Chargers screw it up, the Chargers have to go to Los Angeles, but now it leaves Oakland stuck. So where is Oakland now? Las Vegas. A team where I remember sitting down with Roger in whatever it was, 2009, 2010, listening to him saying, we will never be involved in gambling. We will never do gambling deals. And there will never be a team in Las Vegas. And the only reason all of that happened is because literally some owners decided, I'm not playing ball. So this idea of stadium funding, I think, has come to a head where taxpayers just need to say no. Because at the end of the day, here's the structure of those deals I've never understood. The only city to ever give money for a stadium where in exchange they took an ownership interest in the team was the Green Bay Packers. So ask yourself, why is there a National Football League team in a town as small as Green Bay, Wisconsin? Because they own it.
And soon to be Arlington Heights, Illinois.
I don't know, but
That's where
think about that.
That's where Chicago is moving its team.
Yeah. So when you think about how the Green Bay Packers came into existence, they wanted to move. They asked the city and the town for money. The city and town says, we'll do it, but only if we own it. Think about what every NFL team, let me flip that around. Think about what every state legislature or governor should do for these stadium deals. If you want taxpayer money, that's great. But in exchange for that taxpayer money, the city of Buffalo is going to own 20% of the Buffalo Bills. Or San Diego is going to own 20% of the Chargers. But no NFL owner wants to do that, because as soon as an NFL owner does that, what happens? They can never move, and then they can never shake you down anymore. This is just bare knuckle business. And what I don't like from sports reporters is no sports reporter wants to talk about how their NFL team really operates, because they don't want to get kicked out of the locker room. And if you make a decision to be a journalist, like many of these journalists have now done with the Defense Department, and refusing to sign on to these goofy regulations that the Pentagon has put out, your job is to be a journalist first and to cover stories second.
Well, thank you so much. Turf Wars, go get it from Amazon, right?
Get it from Amazon or anywhere where you like books. And Nathaniel, thank you very much. Anytime you want me back, I enjoy it, my friend. Marlon, it is great to see you, my friend.
Hey, great to see you.
I know
as
you
well.
got to catch a flight, so thank you for your time today, Counselor.
Thank you guys, fellas. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, to our audience, I'm sorry we didn't get into the other subjects, but next week we will follow up on these discussions. We got a lot of things to talk about today. We have the rallies and protests all over the country. We're trying to take back democracy, and there's a lot of issues that we need to discuss that we can't get to today because we're out of time. So I'd like to thank our superstar panel, Attorney Banks and Primes, and our producers, Dr. Smith. So thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend, and go out there and make sure you get people registered to vote, folks. We're going to need it.